everybody, welcome in. I'm going to be talking about this new collection from BareMinerals today. It's called Bounce and Blur. We've got 4 different blushes. We've also got 2 eyeshadow palettes that are coming in this formula. And I swear, BareMinerals is trying to become like the master of all formulas. You know, they've got the loose texture that of course is iconic. They're really known for that. Pressed products, liquid products, stick products, and now something else that's a completely different animal. And I was really interested when these came out. I ordered one of the blushes and one of the palettes, and then I ended up getting the whole like PR collection here, which I'm grateful for because that gives me even more content to talk about. But here's the thought behind it. It's said to be buildable. It's said to be a wash of mineral and botanical infused color. Fingertip friendly, weightless formulas leave behind a soft, focused, diffused look. There's part of this for me that I can get really on board with, and that would be the blushes, and then the eyeshadow palettes I don't really have the same feeling for. I think the blush formula is interesting. It kind of reminds me of somewhere between like a Maybelline Dream Bouncy blush, remember those from the good old days, and kind of like a ColourPop blush. You know, it's that formula that's walking the line between being a cream and a powder. Yes, you can press your finger down, you can kind of squish into that product, but yet it doesn't have any tackiness, goopiness, wetness that you might expect with something really creamy, you know? So I think that does make it approachable. That does, as far as the blushes are concerned, make it fingertip friendly. It's not gonna be a texture that's really hard to work with if you've just applied a powder or, you know, whatever texture of foundation you've got on there. It's gonna go in easily whether you want to blot this on with your fingertips or a brush. But let's dive into these blush shades a little bit more. First, we've got one that is really the least blushy, and it's called Blurred Buff. It actually feels the most creamy compared to all the others. The others, like, if you were approaching it and you weren't sure what texture it was and you just gave it a light touch, not a press in, but just touch the surface, you might think maybe that is a powder. With this one, it's like an undeniable cream. It's the most creamy, it seems to contain the most moisture of any shade. And I don't really love this for any reason, really. It's not quite enough intensity to be a great bronzer. I mean, it did warm up like my hairline. You might put it like a little bit low on the cheek. Like, I'm looking for a way to use it, but I don't just love it as blush because it's just not blushy enough and it's just not bronzy enough. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see them come out with a line of actual bronzers and maybe some highlighters too. But this shade just kind of gets lost if we're trying to call it a blush. It just doesn't go there for me. These shades all pretty much do. I would say this coral one, the one called Coral Cloud, is your lightest color. It does show up on me, and I do find it to be buildable. And I think a little swipe into it with your finger and then on the cheeks and you see some satisfying color. But that being said, this is the lightest shade, and I see a little sheen coming off of all of these actually. Probably the least sheen coming from this one, that Blurred Buff, but the coral one, the one called Pink Sky, which is your lightest pink, and then the Mauve Sunrise, they all have this kind of satiny finish. So I get where the blur description is coming from a little bit, because it's like, it's not this unattractive, artificial looking sparkle that just kind of settles into lines and looks like you really put some sparkle on, you know? It's a very casual, just gentle, natural looking sheen to the skin. So I think that's where blur comes from with the Bounce and Blur naming. But yeah, this coral shade, it's fine. It's probably the least intense though of anything. And then Pink Sky is a really nice fresh pink on the cheeks. I've kind of been liking this cooler kind of bright pink and the way that sort of works with my skin tone and ends up leaving me looking oddly sun-kissed when I'm done with it. It's pretty. But I think the best bang for your buck is actually Mauve Sunrise. I feel like lightly applied, which is pretty much what I've got on today, it gives you kind of that initial pinky look that this other one does, but then it's also capable of building, I think, a little bit deeper and richer and just looking a little more berry on the cheeks as well. So it has a bit more range, and this was the shade that I thought to purchase myself. And again, a beautiful little sheen to it. I like these blush shades, 3 of the 4, like I said. It's again a really different thing for BareMinerals. They were doing good things, I thought, with their Gen Nude blushes. Also certain ones in their loose formula, some really good powder blushes there, but this is its own animal. So overall, do you need these? Are these a real must-have? If your logic in trying them is like, yeah, I want to step out of the box, I want to try something different where blush is concerned, I would honestly steer you more towards Award and M Cosmetics Serum Blush because these are just kind of next level looking on the skin and just really beautiful, really pure colors. And I mean, that would be my thing. That's my personal opinion here. If we're trying to go off the beaten blush path, that would be the new and different thing I would go for. These, while I like them and I think the format does work for a blush, or that consistency, that texture works fine, it's not screaming like, oh my gosh, this is a total must-have to me, you know? But all that being said, the staying power is pretty good with those, especially the mauve shade. I feel like that really hangs on well. Now let's move on to these eyeshadow palettes. We have Dusk and Dawn. Dawn is going to be your little bit cooler and I think overall slightly lighter range here of 5 shades. And then Dusk takes you a little deeper, a little warmer. We're getting into gold and burgundy in here. And this was the one that really attracted me most online, so that was the one that I bought. But overall, I think this is kind of the easier one to use, this Dawn. This is the one I'm going to be demoing today, but I've done looks with both, and I'll pop those up as I'm talking here. But this is really kind of strange. While they've named these palettes Bounce and Blur, they do not follow exactly what's going on with these blushes. Basically, it's a 5-pan palette with 1 cream shade, and the rest I would describe as sheer powder shadows. Okay, the second to last shade in both of these feels like a true cream, almost even creamier than the blushes feel. Like it is that kind of texture where, yes, you can press into it a little bit, but it has a for sure creaminess. And then these other shades, it's like, okay, that pretty much feels like a powder, not the intensity I would expect out of normal powder shadows, especially like BareMinerals, if you've ever tried a Gen Nude little 6-pack palette that they have, or any other larger palettes that have had really impressive pigmentation. These are just like giving you that sheerness, and I get that that's part of the claim. I understand. They're saying it's fingertip friendly, buildable, and light, but I just don't get why they did it that way. I don't know why they didn't do the entire palette full of a formula that at least kind of resembled that one texture or this. The single cream shade that is in both of these does have good staying power, and it's not like really hard to use or anything, but I do think that some of the sheer powders are a little bit confusing. Since they are definitely more powdery than creamy, I'm drawn to using brushes with them, but yet you don't quite get the satisfying color payoff that you get with most powder shadows. And I've used plenty of powder shadows that do require a little bit of building, and you can still get there with them. And these, I feel like you can spend a lot of time trying to get them built up, and they just don't do it. And you can try to do them with your fingers too. That's definitely an option. I think it's just sort of personal preference. How do you feel like you can control them best? How do you feel like you can work with them the best? It's kind of odd in both that such a dark shade is being the one cream color in here. And I find it also odd that they don't really point that out. Like, here's the one cream and the rest is definitely a completely different ball game. I feel like what's in this palette sort of meshes in with each other a little bit easier. Like as I'm playing with them on the eyes, I feel like one shade just kind of goes into the next a bit better. With this one, I feel like we're kind of like going warm, warmer, really warm and reddish, and then just like 2 charcoal shades that are really, really close, and honestly kind of kill the warm vibe that was being built up there. Here, at least everything seems a little bit cooler to begin with before we get into these grayish kind of stone colors, but I am going to take you through the demo, and that'll explain some of these textures even more in depth. So they're calling this a fingertip friendly formula, but I do think you're going to find certain situations where a brush works fine, but these are still somewhat sheer shadows. So like I'm going to start right here with this kind of mauve shade, and everything's got a little shimmer, just be aware. Except kind of that cream shade comes off as a bit more matte. But I'm going to take that mauve, and I do have an eye primer on. And you can see this reacts pretty much like a powder shadow. It's more sheer than what the brand might usually put out in a powder format, but I think that's how that applies easiest, because I could take my finger and I could try to work it up into my crease, but I'm just more comfortable, if I can, just putting it in there with the brush. So dab in, and we can get a little bit of a soft crease going. Okay, not too bad. They're pretty easy to manage, but again, a sheerer take on a powder shadow. This is another situation where I really don't feel any actual creaminess to this kind of peachy shade. It seems to apply a little more naturally, a little bit more like just makes sense, I guess is the word I'm looking for, with a brush. And then we've got this shade over here that has like this sparkle, and I've tried like getting this to go on with some intensity on my lid, like, okay, I'll build it up with my finger then if that's what I need to do. But it still stays super duper soft looking. And I tried putting it on with the brush, and I even like dug into the product a little bit. That was a mistake. It just like flaked around, chunked around a little bit on me. It's just, this formula is just a little bit frustrating, but I'm trying to get a little bit of this light sheen going on here so maybe you can see what it's like. But yeah, that shade, oddly, it feels kind of like a powder, but it doesn't go on that well with a brush. The others, this one, and this one do okay with the brush, and then this one is, again, our true cream feeling shade. So now I'm gonna go into that. And these have like some good staying power. If you were to swatch them on your arm, like that one's gonna hang around a while, that cream. But it's kind of odd that they only made one shade of cream. They didn't really point it out, you know, like here's your cream shade, because it's distinctly different from everything else in here. And both palettes have that one shade that feels much creamier than everything else. So I'm kind of dabbing that on the outside for a little depth and just kind of building it up with my finger a bit. Then we've got our charcoal right here, which I'm definitely gonna use my flat brush. And I feel like that kind of applies, again, like a sheer powder. Here's the thing, the more you really use fingers on the eyes, I feel like it's harder to control the pressure you apply, and you end up like tugging around more than you ever would when you're using a brush. And I feel like my eye area really doesn't need to be tugged at. The skin doesn't need to be loosened up or anything. Like, I don't want that to really happen prematurely for any reason. If I can get away with a brush, I'd like to use a brush. So I'm just building up a little bit more of that kind of, I don't know, dusty mauve shade that's in the middle. If you're in the mood to intensify, let's take a smaller, like, outer corner brush to this shade. I instinctively tap off excess, but there's not really anything to tap off here. It's just, it stays pretty sheer. And then I think I'll try some of that same shade with a pencil brush and just apply a little bit down below. So basically it's one of those situations where you look at the finished eye and you're like, yeah, that looks fine, you know, there's nothing really wrong with it. But the process to get there, I felt like, was ultimately more fussy, more guesswork about how a shade's gonna actually apply best, you know, with what method. And I'd be so much more content to just use a standard either powder eyeshadow palette or maybe a palette that I knew was gonna be like a true creamy texture and just know that, you know? Here it's really like a sheer powder texture with one random cream mixed in. So again, these palettes, guys, not my jam. I mean, I understand that they're trying to create this illusion of ease, of kind of finger painting your look onto your eyes just real easily, but I don't really think it's that simple. And it really seems odd that 4 out of 5 shades don't lend themselves to that technique very well at all. I mean, you could apply any powder shadow with your fingers if you so desire. It's just an unusual choice. I don't know if they maybe did initially design these to be all that kind of creamy, ColourPop Super Shock shadow type texture, and then maybe decided it wasn't working, so they changed most of the palette to be more powdery. I don't know. Definitely the type of thing where, yeah, it can be made to work. I'll go about my day and I'll have this look on and it'll be just fine. But I could have turned out this exact look quicker with a number of other just powder palettes. So that's just my take here, guys. I know we're all entitled to our own opinions, but you come to my channel, you get one person's opinion, that's mine. And that's what I think about this stuff. I think the blushes are good and really, really workable in this bounce and blur texture. And I think the eyeshadows are gonna be kind of confusing for a lot of people. And I think will require a lot of trial and error, like how will this go on best? Is it a finger shade? Is it a brush shade? And I think that dilemma can end up leaving you a little confined on the different things you can turn out with either of these two palettes. So thank you guys so much for your time. I hope this was useful. I really felt like I needed to do this video because it's a hard thing to just see online and know, like, how's that gonna feel? How's that gonna be to put on and work with? So I hope I laid it out for you well enough here. Thank you so much for watching. Please let me know your video requests down below, and I'll see you soon. Bye.